Welcome to another eco-independence video. I'd just like to touch on the Houthi rebels. Now, are they Houthi rebels or are they Houthi defenders? I don't like to say rebels. What are they rebelling against? They're fighting for their own country. So anyway, to understand the Houthi rebels, we'll call them rebels. Everyone calls them rebels. But I'm not happy with the word rebels. Anyway, in order to understand them, first thing you need to look at the history of Yemen. And I'm not going to go into the history of Yemen, but in this video, but there are videos out there and even the Wikipedia. You look at the history of Yemen. But to understand the history of Yemen, you need to also understand the history of two or three other countries, particularly two or three other countries. Firstly, the UK, the history of the UK. Secondly, the history of Saudi Arabia. And when you understand the history of Saudi Arabia, you also have to understand the history of the United States of America. So let's just start with the UK, the history of the UK. We'll miss out all the first 1,000 years. There was this king, then there was another king, then there was another king. And this is kind of interesting because with Saudi Arabia, the history of the Saudi Arabia royal family, they only go back 100 years. If you go back 200 years, there was no Saudi Arabia royal family. I'm jumping on a bit now. But anyway, the UK history, colonial power. UK was in Yemen for 130 years because Yemen is in a strategic location. The location of Yemen, the British were on their way to India. They invaded Yemen. Well, they asked Yemen, can we please come in? And Yemen said, no, thank you very much. We don't want you. So they invaded Yemen. Illegal occupation of Yemen by the British for 130 years. How many people did they kill when they were there? I'm not going to get into the numbers and that, but it was a lot. Were they paid any compensation when they left? And the British left Yemen in the 1960s. They were kicked out, fighting. It was nasty. They were not wanted. A lot of people suffered. Yemen was left two countries, north and south. The British divided Yemen. The British destroyed the whole structure of the Yemen country when they were there. They pushed their own ideas onto the people. When they left it in a mess. It was never, and while they were there, British schools were being built in Britain, British roads, British universities. The police were the whole of the British economy was built on places like Yemen. It was used to exploit India. It was on the route for India. So did the British pay any compensation when they left Yemen? Of course not. They had so many colonies. Did they pay compensation to India? Of course not. They cannot. Of course not. But Libya had to pay compensation when Colonel Gaddafi was accused. Well, I don't know if he did it or not. It doesn't really matter. It's no good for him anyway. When Colonel Gaddafi shot down the plane, the Lockerbie plane, the UK government forced Libya to pay compensation for the shooting down of that plane. So did the UK pay compensation for all the damage they did to Yemen? Nope. So the UK government still owe Yemen compensation for the colonialization of Yemen because it was because of the location of Yemen being in such a strategic location. And that location has now come to the forefront. The location of Yemen is now, again, important because Yemen has started controlling the ships passing in front of it. So again, the location of Yemen. Now, Yemen wants to control its location. When the British were there, the British controlled the location of Yemen. They enjoyed it. They made profit from it. They used it. But now it's the turn of Yemen. No, I don't support Yemen in any way. I'm not on their side. I'm not on this side or that side. But but fairness, if it's Yemen has to be paid compensation for the damages done against it in colonialization. And of course, the British are not going to pay it. So the Yemen took a tariff for more ships passing by. That could be seen as a compensation for all the damage that the British did for 130 years. The Yemen have a right to be equal to every other nation in the world, but they're not. And they're not because they were colonized, because everything was destroyed and disturbed, and the political structure was disturbed, the leaders were disturbed, everything was completely upset. The balance, the equipoise in the country was destroyed by the British. So we became strong and the Yemen became weak. So now what's happening? It's quite interesting. Now Yemen are becoming strong. And the British, well, we're still here. So let's jump forward a bit. The next thing that happened, because there's too much history to go into all the small details. If you go into all the small details, you'll miss the important part. The important part is Saudi Arabia. In 2014, Saudi Arabia invaded Yemen. A coalition of Arabic states invaded Yemen. So what did Yemen do? Yemen didn't do a terrorist attack. Yemen didn't knock the Twin Towers down. They didn't go outside of Yemen. There was a civil war within Yemen. The winners were not the ones that Saudi Arabia and the US and the UK wanted. UK sent special forces into Yemen in the 2000s. I saw it on the news, but can't remember the exact year. But I remember hearing about UK special forces in Yemen. I think it was then when the fighting was starting, but early on. So then the Saudi-led coalition invaded Yemen in 2014, 2015. They started bombing, and then they sent the ground troops, and they did a blockade. Now, what right has another country to make a blockade on another country? They were not attacked. Saudi Arabia was not attacked. UK was not attacked. US was not attacked. And a blockade was put in front of Yemen in 2014, 2015. That blockade caused a lot of suffering and pain, and it was illegal. No country in the world should be allowed to stop another country. If they're having a civil war, that's up to them. That's for them to sort out. It's not the right of any other country to invade a country just because another government is going in power that is not financially working for other benefits for countries outside that country. So then the UK sold bombs to Saudi Arabia. The US sold bombs to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia bombed Yemen. It was UK bombs that were landing in Yemen from 2015 right up until the 2000s when the Saudi had to admit they couldn't win. There was a stalemate in Yemen. So it was US bombs and UK bombs dropping on Yemen for years and years and years. The UK's picked the targets. The US refueled the planes. The Saudis were the ones who did the bombing. But in all intents and purposes, it was the US and the UK and the French and someone else. And and it was Saudi Arabia with a royal family. And the Saudi royal family runs Saudi Arabia. Now, the history of Saudi Arabia, I would say, you also need to, if you go in and read the history of Saudi Arabia, it doesn't take long because it's not a very old country. It's not. To put it in a sentence, the US created Saudi Arabia because of the oil. And Abby Martins made a video, the Empire Files, about 8 years ago about Saudi Arabia. So I'd say watch the Empire Files and search Saudi Arabia, and you can watch and Abby Martins does a video about the history of Saudi Arabia, and it's quite useful. So Saudi Arabia basically has a fake royal family. They're not the royal family. They got some oil, they bought some guns, they killed out the other tribes. He said, "I'm the king." So what are Saudi Arabia? Saudi Arabia are a resource state. Now, a resource state is a state that get most of their taxes from one resource. So if you read the Tim Burgess, the looting machine, he explains in more depth what a resource state is. And in Africa, you have a lot of resource states. That means that the government relies from one resource for its tax income. It doesn't need the people to pay tax. If the people pay tax or not, it doesn't care. And in a resource state, the people are actually an inconvenience. The population, we've got our oil money. We don't need them. And but they're there, so I suppose we have to keep them. But we keep them under control. In the resource state, the population just need to be kept under control. So, like Saudi Arabia doesn't even give its population a vote. That's the easiest way. Keep them under control. Don't want people voting. So Saudi Arabia doesn't let its people vote and doesn't let its women, go anywhere. So it doesn't need to, because the leaders are in their mansions watching horse races or football games and buying football teams and racing their horses, and they're leading a nice life. So they don't care about the population. They're just so another way of keeping control of the population is to engage them in employment. So the Saudis buy a lot of military weapons, and they employ a lot of the people to become pilots. And for pilots, you have planes. You have to look after the planes. So the military can also support the government. And they keep employed. So they keep so it's win-win, but it's lose-lose for the population who are not Saudi Arabia's not in the military, and protesters are beheaded in Saudi Arabia. That's it. There's no question about it. So then you have Saudi Arabia saying something's not right in Yemen. Who are they to say something's not right in Yemen? You look at the track record of Saudi Arabia. So it was the Saudi-led coalition that bombed Yemen. Now, all the other Arab states, they joined in with Saudi Arabia. So people are saying now in Gaza. Only the Yemenis are supporting the Palestinians. What about all the other Arab countries? Well, let's clarify, you have Arab population and you have Arab leaders. So the leaders of all those countries in the coalition, the against Yemen, they're all under the control of the US and the UK and the French. It's not that the people in those countries don't support Gaza. It's just they don't have a control of their country. Their country is under control from the US and from other countries, and they have a puppet leadership. Now with Yemen, the whole point of the Saudi-led coalition to destroy Yemen, invaded across the border with the soldiers to fight Yemen, was to get Yemen under control, to make it a proxy of the US or the UK, like these other countries, Egypt, Jordan, all these other countries, Kuwait. You just look at the countries who are in the Saudi Arabia coalition which bombed Yemen, and you will see that they are all under the control of Western powers. They attempted to get Yemen, to take the power of Yemen away from its leadership. It doesn't matter whether Houthis or whatever name they were. What matters is you have a foreign country taking over another country, and they are going to rebel. You can call them ISIS, Taliban, whatever name you want, but it's one country taking over another country in order to get access to the resources. So Saudi Arabia, a monarchy, and Yemen is not a monarchy. So Saudi Arabia didn't take much for Saudi Arabia to want to invade Yemen, because when you're next door to a republic and you're a brutal, monarchy, then, like what happened to Bonaparte, the British didn't leave him there. They wanted him, they were worried, the British royal family they saw what happened to the French royal family, and they didn't want it to happen. So the same, the Saudis, they saw what happened they know the history of France, what happened to the French royal family. And the Saudis know that they are just not the real royal family. They're just like a pretend royal family walking around like they're kings and queens, or kings. They don't like queens. So anyway, if you want to understand the Houthis, why the Houthis fighting cargo ships, first you understand they've had the embargo was put in front of them in 2014. They had a right. Now the Houthis are telling the world that embargo was not right. They're saying they're supporting the people, the Gazians, but basically what they're saying, one country shouldn't put an embargo in front of another country, and it was put in front of Yemen. So then the other thing is that the Yemen are hitting cargo ships, and they said they're going to hit UK cargo ships and US cargo ships and Israeli also. But there's a problem with finding UK-owned ships. They're flagged here, the sailors are from there, the goods are coming from here and there. So it's all very confusing. This brings into the globalization. So what are these cargo ships bringing? They're exporting merchandise made below the minimum wage in a sweatshop conditions in somewhere like China, which China is a big sweatshop. and they're moving it to another country to sell at a very high price, where there's a minimum wage. It's a system of exploitation. They're taking resources from one country, like for example, taking oil from let's say taking oil from Nigeria or whatever, sending it to the UK. The local Nigerians are not getting the benefit. There's some bribes given to a few handful of politicians, and so these container ships, that there is part of the global system of exploitation, slave labor, getting people to work themselves their whole lives just for another country, the benefit of another country. So this whole system of moving merchandise here and there is passing by Yemen. But that system is corrupt. That system is rotten. And it just, some country, when all the oil's gone from Africa, then we say, bye-bye, thank you very much. And that's it. So this system, we have to look at the whole system of globalization. And then that brings into the solutions of the Middle East. And I'll just touch on it very quickly here. What we need is a few countries to form a self-reliant, independent region of people linked in language and religion and resources to get together to form an economic zone of a few countries where they can be self-sufficient. It's not that we have to send from the other side of the world to send to the other side of the world, and without letting the people of that population enjoy their merchandise, and then destroying the industries in the other side of the world just to make profit. And so we have to get at the moment, all the merchandise is moving, and we're getting very rich countries, very poor, relying and needing very poor countries in order to supply them with their resources, and bombing to hell anybody who disagrees. So the Middle East, that needs to be a self-sufficient region. Africa needs to be self-sufficient. Africa doesn't need to export anything. It has everything it needs to be fine. It has all the resources. Africa needs Africa. Africa doesn't need Europe. Europe needs Africa. Europe will collapse without Africa overnight. We can't survive a day in the UK without getting African oil. But Africa has the oil. It doesn't need to. So the solution to the Middle East is the same as the solution to Africa and to Central America. We need to form self-sufficient. Africa needs to form a self-sufficient unit and to keep its resources. Same as South America, Central America. Europe needs to start to look after itself instead of destroying other regions. So the solution to Gaza is to be part of an economic bloc. Now, these countries which are under control by the US and by the UK in the Middle East, they need to get their own control back. So this problem is not only a problem for Israel and Gaza, Jordan, Egypt, some of the other countries in that area, they need to wrestle, they need to get independence from foreign interference. Saudi Arabia, it needs to change its leadership. There's no way around it, and become part of an economic zone that doesn't rely on a resource state making all its profit. It needs to form a self-sufficient economic zone. So that it's not about religion, but religion can be part of an area formed. So the solution to the Houthis is it's not only the Houthis. The Houthis are just one player in it. When you want to solve the Houthi solution, you have to also solve the whole Middle East, and that means giving the independence that the British actually promised independence in the First World War to the Arab states. They never got it, and even now, places like Saudi Arabia, they are somehow a proxy of US. They are a slave to oil. I mean, the rich family, they just have it so much. The poor people in Saudi Arabia, they're suffering. So Yemen are changing the dynamics because they have got some military training from the years of attack they were under by the British and the US and the coalition of Saudi Arabia. They now have become military strong, so they are changing the nature of the Middle East along with Iran, and Iraq is now also attacking Israel. So what you're getting is a coalition, a group of Arab countries becoming united, and this needn't be, the rest of the world needn't feel that this is a problem. If they want to become united, let them become united. Let them keep their resources, and we'll find our own resources. It's not that they are an enemy to us. We don't need to attack them. Just leave them to themselves. They let them do their own thing. There's no need to go to war with the Houthis in Yemen. All they want is their own land. They don't want the Saudis. They don't want a blockade put around with them. And they want neighbors to be happy. You can't just stand by and watch your neighbor being killed. Of course, you have to. So the solution of the Houthi rebels is not really only the Houthi rebels; it's the whole region. And you're bringing into the Israel and Gaza and the Palestinians. So the Israelis have to understand that they are, if they want to be part of this economic zone, then they have to behave more humbly. But I'll go to another video on that because this one has been long enough already. Thanks. This is a eco-independence video. Bye now.